Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I thank you all for giving me the opportunity to do the Bible class as well as morning worship for you all. I mean, it must be a breather not having Scott for another week, right? I'm kidding. Well, so this morning I want to spend today's Bible study on speaking on the origin of the church. When it comes to studying this particular topic of studying the origin of the church, rather, it is beneficial for all of us to know where the church came from, where the church was established, and so forth. Because it seems like in the modern society, a lot of people forgot where the New Testament church came from. A lot of people just want to go to different denominations because they think that was the established church and so forth. Knowing the origin of the church is imperative for all of us to know, because if we know where the church came from, if we know that there is only one church and so forth, it'll help us realize in what spiritual state we are in. If we go and so forth, the transliterated word, Greek word for the New Testament church is ecclesia, or called out. And as Christians, we are called out according to the Great Commission that was commanded to us in Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20. Verse 18 telling the 12 apostles, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." They were called out to go and preach and teach others the word. And we are given the same commandment today by example from the apostles now to us. And during the study, this section is going to cover 4 major points towards the origin of the church. We're probably not going to get through all of them. Probably not. This is a pretty in-depth study. But when it comes to the origin of the church, we're probably going to look at the first 2 this morning. That is that the church was first, or the church originated in the mind of God, number 1. And also the origin of the church was seen in prophecies as well. But if we do get to point 3, we're going to look at the comparisons of type antitype. We're going to look at the differences, because we see throughout the scriptures that the church is the antitype to a lot of different types throughout the Bible. And then we're going to look at the promises that are given according to the New Testament church. Now let us begin by looking into the mind of God. The New Testament church was a plan that God put into fruition before time itself. And a lot of people don't seem to grasp that the New Testament church was planned by God before we were created, before everything began as we know it. And that is found in Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 5. And it tells us about how the church was planned. Verses 4 and 5 rather. "Just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy, without blame before him in love, having predestined us to adoption as sons by Jesus Christ in himself, according to the good pleasure of his will." So when it comes to the plan for all mankind to be saved, this was planned before Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The church was planned before then. And after they sinned, sin came into the world, and the earth itself became corrupted. But there's a ray of hope immediately after that happened. In Genesis chapter 3 verse 15, where God said, "And I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed, and he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Christ dying on the cross, bruising his heel. Then we see Christ dealing the blow to Satan to bruise his head by raising up from the dead on the first day of the week. And when it comes to the different theories that people can come up with, there are some false interpretations when it comes to the time of establishment of the Old Covenant. And there are so many of them, it would probably cover all of class to cover all of them, but and even more so. So I'm not going to bore you with all of that. But I'm going to at least look at 3 of them so that we all can know for future reference. Because we need to know this as Christians, because we have to be knowledgeable in all things according to the scriptures. I mean, we see in Hosea 4 and verse 6, "My people were destroyed for lack of knowledge." We have to be as knowledgeable as we can as Christians. So it's best to know if we learn as much as possible. And And the first one is that people think that the Mosaic Law was an imperfect product, or incomplete product of the New Testament church. And we see in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 that Paul contradicts this. He calls the old covenant glorious and so forth. And that is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 7 through 11. And Scott, do you want to read that once you get there? 7 through 11.
2 Corinthians?
Yes, 2 Corinthians 3, 7 through 11.
But if the ministry of death in letters engraved on stones came with glory, so that the sons of Israel could not look intently at the face of Moses because of the glory of his face fading as it was, how will the ministry of the Spirit fail to be even more with glory? For if the ministry of condemnation has glory, much more does the ministry of righteousness abound in glory. For indeed, what had glory in this case has no glory because of the glory that surpasses it. For if that which fades away was with glory, much more that which remains is in glory.
So Paul contradicts this by saying that the old covenant had glory. It had a purpose, and that's what we need. That's what we have to know. That's what we have to remember. The old covenant, sure, is no longer binding to us today, according to Colossians 2:14, that the old law was nailed away on the cross. But the old covenant had its time. The old covenant had its purpose, and it was glorious for its appointed time. And Paul uses the illustration of Moses' face after he looked at the back of God in Exodus chapter 33. His face was shining. But then as time went on, his face grew dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And that's how the glory of the old covenant was. It was glorious for its time. But when Christ came into the world, when Christ died on the cross and so forth, the old law was done away with. The old law was finished. Because its purpose has been fulfilled, and a lot of people, and there's people who still think that the old covenant should be followed today, and there's plenty of other people who believe in that. If a popular televangelist who passed away a few years ago, Billy Graham, believed in that. He believed that the Ten Commandments were still binding. But when it comes to that, but we have to use this argument. If the Ten Commandments is binding, then what about everything else that comes with the Mosaic Law? What about the different offerings you have to take and everything? I had to do a study on Exodus 29 at a congregation a couple weeks ago. Wasn't fun, but Exodus 29, it got into gruesome detail about what we need to do with the entrails of a bull and entrails of a goat and everything. It's very gross, very gruesome, very graphic. Yes, but it shows how specific the Mosaic Law was. You had to do this with the entrails. You have to do this with the kidneys. You have to do this with the fat of the liver, and so forth. That shows you how much detail there was in the Old Covenant. And that the Old Covenant, just like the New Covenant today, had to be followed by the Jews back at that time. It's no longer binding today because Christ died on the cross. Christ was our sacrifice. We don't have to worry about. You don't have to worry about me sacrificing a cow in front of your eyes and slaughtering it and so forth. I bet you all are glad. I'm glad in particular. I don't like that stuff, except if I could eat it. But when it comes to the Mosaic Law, it had its purpose, it had its times, it had its different things that you had to abide by. But Christians today have it a lot better in the sense we don't have to worry about doing all of that. And even in 1 John chapter 5, verse 3, in the latter part, John tells us, and his commandments are not burdensome, in the sense that it's easier being a Christian than it is a Jew. And that's something I can go on for the whole Bible study. But let us get back on the origin of the church. And the theory that the Mosaic Law was an incomplete product would also implement that God is not a perfect being, because the Mosaic Law was perfect for its time. For its time, the Mosaic Law was needed to obey. The Jews had to obey it. But the time has ended because Christ died on the cross. Christ rose from the dead, and Christ established the New Testament church. Now that Christ has established a new, better doctrine than the Mosaic Law, there's no need to having an inferior, something that has passed away, something that is faded away in glory. It was perfect for its time, but its time is not over. It's like going to the store and getting milk. Milk only lasts for milk today can last for months with all the preservatives that are in it. But if you drink regular actual milk that comes from a cow that's pure from all the garbage preservatives, it goes away after 3 or 4 days if you don't drink it. It passes away quickly. But we see that's how the Mosaic Law was. It was perfect. It was that perfect half-gallon glass jar of milk. But as time went on, it got old, it got spoiled, it got rotten. And therefore, when Christ came into the earth and died, an even better product came along. And the reason why the Mosaic Law got rotten, it wasn't because it got corrupt. It wasn't because of God. God made it so that everyone can abide by it. Because He even made ways for people who was financially poor. He made alternatives for them. This Mosaic Law was for everyone. It was for all the Jews so that they could abide by it, and for the proselytes that come in as well for the most part. But it's because of the Jews that made it wrong. The Mosaic Law was glorious for its time until eventually God tore it away from the Israelites. We see that in Jeremiah 11 verse 10 about how God said that He tore away the covenant from Israel because of their continual because they continued forsaking God. You look into minor prophets like Hosea, they played the harlot with God and so forth. I just learned about the book of Hosea last week, and man, what a powerful book! What a powerful book, and what a thing we can see about how God loved Israel, but yet everything that Israel did, it was just terrible. But we have to know that we can be like Israel. We can fall short, but thanks to Christ dying on the cross, thanks to Christ raising from the dead, we are now able to receive forgiveness of sins. The Jews didn't have that privilege. All they could do is pass on the sin to the goat or bull that they're sacrificing. But now God can just blot it out, and we see that throughout the scriptures that we have forgiveness of sins and so forth if we have that repentant heart. And in the second theory that is given out, after the apostles went out to receive the reward, the church was established. After the apostles died and received their eternal reward, the church was established. That's not true at all. We see Peter talking about in the day of Pentecost. We see Paul's many missionary journeys establishing different congregations throughout Asia Minor, the church of Ephesus, the churches of Asia, and so forth. All these different congregations that Paul established. Do you really think that the church wasn't established during that time? The church was established on the day of Pentecost officially. And not only that, both Paul and John called the New Testament church the kingdom, according to Colossians 1:13, Revelation 1:9. The kingdom, what is the kingdom? The Greek word for kingdom is basileia, which is kingdom. But when it comes to the kingdom, the heaven, the New Testament church, there's so many uses that the word kingdom has in the Bible. But the kingdom in this case that they're using it in is the New Testament church because it was already established. Matthew 16 tells us that Jesus said, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." Upon this rock I will build my church, one church, but this church was coming soon. This church was in the horizon, and the people needed to be ready for it. And instead of the people wanting to follow Christ, the majority of the people, thanks to the Pharisees, end up not liking Christ when it mattered most, when it came to the trials and the false trials and everything that Christ had to go through. But then here's a third theory I want to give out that our fellow Baptist brethren enjoy, that John the Baptist established a church. The Baptists believe that John the Baptist established a church, which is it's not true at all. John was the one who's called Elijah in Malachi chapter 4, verse 5, when it says, "Behold, I will send Elijah the prophet, and he will prepare the way for the Lord." John was preparing the people of Israel for Christ. He was paving the way. Isaiah calls it the one who was crying out in the wilderness. John was one who was preparing the way for Christ. The message that he gave out was, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He was preparing the people for Christ. John the Baptist wasn't Christ either. And we see that throughout I forget where it is exactly. I should have put that in my notes. It would have been important if I did that. But there, at a certain occasion, John said, I must decrease so that he can increase. If John was the Christ, he wouldn't have said this. He wouldn't have said this at all. If he was the Christ, he wouldn't have said that statement at all. And when it comes to people saying that John the Baptist established a church, I don't know what they're thinking personally. But John was the one who paved the way for the New Testament church to be established. And when it comes to the New Testament church, the New Testament church is God's purpose to save mankind. Ephesians chapter 3, 1 through 11. And this is a great way to realize how far God went for us. One of the most popular verses that even people who don't believe in Christ know. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. God loved us, that he sent his only begotten for us. And yet, there are times that we fall short. There's times that we forsake God. There's times that we sin against God. Personally, there's things I struggle with as a Christian, and there's things that I have to work on myself. Because I know I'm not perfect, and I know you all are not perfect. And if one of you thinks you're perfect, I think there's a place that we can establish a time to study for 3 hours after services. Don't think you guys want that. But seriously, I'm just joking about that with you. I know you all know you're not perfect, because all of us have flaws. The only one who lived in this earth and was perfect was Jesus Christ. In Hebrews 4:15 tells us tells us plainly as black and white. He was tempted in all points as we are, yet without sin. The latter part of Hebrews 4:15. But when it comes to the mind of God, God's mind is something we can never fully comprehend. Remember in Isaiah 55:8-9, when God said to Isaiah, "My ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." God's mind is something we can never comprehend. But we do know that he loves us. We can't comprehend that love, but we know that he loves us. He loved us so much that he sent his Son down to die for us. And throughout the times of ancient history, that was been prophesied through the prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, Malachi, all these different prophets that were sent out. Elijah and Elisha working to fulfill God's plan and so forth. All these different prophets, ever since the world began, prophesied that there is a Christ coming. Through him, all the people will have an opportunity to be forgiven of their sins if they go to him. If they go through the immersion process and so forth. Next, we're going to look at that the mind of God was foretold in prophecies. There are many prophecies that are mentioned about the church being established. But for your boredom and my sake, I'm not going to go through all of them. There's so many. There's so many. But let us look at a few of these prophecies that are mentioned about the church being established. And that is in Isaiah chapter 2 was a really good one. Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 through 4 is one of the most well-known ones, and one of the ones that all of us can understand. It's plain as day. And it starts off by saying, "Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted among the hills. And all nations shall flow into it. Many people shall come and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his path. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." So as we look throughout this, if we look through this prophecy, there are many key phrases that many prophets use in their prophecies. Like when it comes to the latter days. A lot of our pre-millennialist friends think that this is talking about the second coming of Christ, but most of the time in the Old Testament, when the latter days comes out, is said, That usually means the New Testament church. The Christian age is upon us. And Peter uses this when he quoted Joel's prophecy about how in the last days the Spirit shall be poured upon all flesh, and so forth. And this is what was said from the prophet Joel and so forth. But it comes to the latter days. At this time period, around 700 BC, give or take, was when Isaiah was prophesying. The latter days are considered to be the next and final age, the Christian age. This age we're living in is the final age before the second coming will be established. And that's why we have to get ready for it. Now, this age has lasted for over 2,000 years. A lot of people are starting to think, oh, well, if he hasn't come in 2,000 years, how come he's not here yet? But Peter gives that answer when he says, to the Lord, 1,000 years is as one day, and 1 day is as 1,000 years. The time does not work with God like we do. God doesn't age. God is immortal, and we're not. Our spiritual selves are immortal in a sense, but our physical bodies are not immortal at all. We see that Peter said, soon I must put up my tent before you. We see Paul, I am being poured out as a drink offering. And I've kept the faith. I've finished the course. I've kept the faith. Now there's waiting for me a crown of righteousness in heaven, and so forth. And when in latter days, Peter used that same quoted Joel by saying the latter days. But we see the word mountain. Mountain is a place of refuge and rest, mostly mentioned throughout the scriptures and prophecies. And when in ancient times, you see cities like Samaria and Jerusalem were fortified cities in part to their geographic location. And Jericho is another one. Jericho is a fortified city too. In Joshua chapter 4, the king of Jericho was confident that Israel couldn't get to them anytime soon because it was flooding season in the Jordan River. But yet, as we know, we all know that the walls came tumbling down in Jericho. Jericho was defeated because God was with the children of Israel and not with the people at Jericho. And as we know, only one family survived, and that was Rahab's family because of the promise that the spies made with her in Joshua chapter 5 or 6. But we look at these fortified cities. The Edomites had a city called their capital city Petra. It was literally carved on the side of a mountain. If you look at pictures of it, it is so interesting how that city was carved on the side of a mountain. And that's how they were able to evade enemy attacks until eventually God said that he would destroy them himself, that they would be cowering and so forth, according to the prophecy that Obadiah prophesied to them. But when it comes to a place of refuge and rest, Jesus offers rest to those who come to him. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. I think I missed a verse in there. But God offers the highest amount of refuge and rest that Christians can ever dream of. That's heaven. Heaven is a place for all eternity. It is a place that will never be destroyed, as prophesied, as told by the Hebrew writer in Hebrews 12:28, when it says, "For we will receive a kingdom that will never be shaken, a kingdom that will not be shaken, a kingdom that will never be destroyed." Heaven will never be destroyed, and like the New Testament church isn't going to be destroyed by anything anytime soon. It is the longest lasting. It's the longest lasting. The Bible is the longest piece of literature that's outlived everything else, and that's for a reason. That's because the Bible is the most important book that we can ever own. It is the book that we will never be able to put down. It is a book that we can never put down because it tells us the ways. It tells us the path that we need to take towards eternal life. Without the Bible, would have little to nothing about how we need to live as Christians and so forth. But we have the Bible in order for us to know how we need to live as Christians. All nations, what is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 2. All nations means both Jews and Gentiles. Both Jews and Gentiles are offered the opportunity to be with God for all eternity if we obey his commandments. Peter, quoting Joel for his sermon, used the term all flesh, which signifies both Jews and Gentiles. And we see that throughout the scriptures. The Jews didn't have the greatest relationship with the Gentiles, and most particularly the Samaritans when you get towards 400 BC onwards. We see that we see during the days of Nehemiah when a group of the children of Israel was able to return from Persia back into Jerusalem in order to rebuild the walls. We see that the Samaritans kept mocking, kept getting under the skin of the children of Israel, saying that a fox could jump over the walls, a fox could get through the walls, and so forth, or they could push the walls down, and so forth. And it's kind of like your average rivalry, so to speak. It's kind of like Marshall fans versus WVU fans, or WVU fans versus Pitt fans. I'm pretty neutral in that fight, so I'm not. And plus, most of you here are Marshall fans, so I'm not going to say anything bad. It's like 65-1, and I do not like those odds. But when it comes to both Jews and Gentiles, when it comes to that, every person on this earth has an opportunity to be forgiven of their sins if they follow the plan that the Bible sets for us, the plan of salvation, if you will. If they follow that, if they learn that they need to fix their lives, if they realize that they can't do it alone, that they have to have Christ in their lives, everyone is given the opportunity, no matter what skin color you have and everything else. This nation's having problems with that again, and always had problems with it. And when it comes to the New Testament church, there's no barriers between any of that, because all nations are given the opportunity to be forgiven of their sins. Neither shall they learn war. When it comes to that, Christians are to love their enemies, according to Matthew 5:44, when Jesus said, "Love your enemies." But when it comes to, and we have to give to the needy when the opportunity is given. Look at the example of the rich young ruler in Matthew 19 verses 16 through 30, and we see that the rich young ruler had had great possessions. And in Luke's account of the rich young ruler, Jesus said, "There's one thing that you lack. Go and sell all that you have and give the money that you earn from it to the poor. Then you can carry your cross and follow me." We see that, and then we all know what happened after that. The rich young ruler went away sorrowful because he had many possessions. We see the rich young ruler wasn't happy that he had to give up the things that he loved. But and that's what holds a lot of people back from becoming a Christian, in the sense that they don't want to give up the things in life that they love. But what the mindset that we have to have is that God gave up something precious too. He sent his son down to die on the cross for us. He gave up something that he loved because he loved us. And we have to have that attitude when it comes to being a Christian. There's things that we can't do anymore. We can't go. There's things that we can't do, but we also have to have the attitude of number one. God had to send his son down to die on the cross for our sins. Christ died for us. Number one. Not only that, why would you want to get into the things that this world has to offer? This world, in most cases, is a beautiful place. I mean, if you can't really tell by the concrete streets of Charleston, because it's all concrete. But once you get into the northern part of West Virginia, I'm being a little prejudiced here. I should stop with that. But a little more locally, or a little more on south, Watauga State Park. If you guys been there, it's a beautiful place. I bet most of you have. It is a beautiful place, and we see that, the world's a beautiful place, but heaven's a better place than this world, because this world has an expiration date. This world is coming to an end, according to 2 Peter chapter 3. And we have to help others realize this. It's hard for people to comprehend this because they see how wonderful that this world seems to them. I mean, a lot of people like to go to Las Vegas because of all the pretty lights and everything, and also all the gambling that goes on down there. But I doubt they love it once they realize they see red numbers on their bank account. But when it comes to all these things that this world has to offer, this world is beautiful in some places, but heaven is pure bliss. Heaven is a place that we want to be, and we have to help others realize this. Because if we don't help others realize what state they're in, we're going to be accounted for it too. we have to work and bring others to Christ. All of us are commissioned to go out and helping those who are lost. And then next we can look at Daniel's prophecy. It's probably the last thing we're going to look at because this is a lot of information, this part. It's in Daniel chapter 2, verses 36 through 35. Once I get there. It says, "This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings. Well, you know what? That's a lot of fluff. We can look at Daniel 2:44 instead. In the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." But throughout this prophecy, there are different kingdoms mentioned in this prophecy. I didn't want to go through all of that because the most important part, which needed to be read, is Daniel 2:44. But we see that the head of gold was Babylon. Babylon, and during the time of Daniel, throughout the rest of the time until Christ came into the world, that Babylon was the most fabulous kingdom at that time in the world. First fabulous kingdom basically ever, according to what this is saying. Babylon was quite the magnificent kingdom. The location, the Hagen Gardens, one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, was located there. And we see that. But if you look at history, Nebuchadnezzar ends up making this place for a wife because she missed what her nation looked like and so forth. It's an interesting story, but we see throughout this we see that Babylon only was around for a short time because Nebuchadnezzar, well, according to Baker's Bible Atlas, it says that Nebuchadnezzar reigned for more than 40 years, but unfortunately did not prepare successors who could efficiently carry out his policies. And we see it in the end of Daniel chapter 4 that Nebuchadnezzar proclaims that the Lord God of heaven was the one that they need to abide by. And he made that a law, it seems like, at the end of Daniel chapter 4. But unfortunately, his descendants and so forth do not carry on that. We see that the Medo-Persian Empire came after that, which is the silver part in the statue. And we see that Darius invaded Babylon, which is recorded at the end of Daniel chapter 5. Daniel was an old man at this point, who was a high-ranking official in the Persian Empire. And we see that he was highly ranked because that leads to the events of Daniel in the lion's den in Daniel chapter 6. The other princes were jealous of Daniel's reputation. They wanted to end him for it. It comes to mind. It's a good comparison when it comes to how Jesus was. Jesus growing and rapidly in popularity. The Pharisees wanted to end it. And therefore, they led to the false trials and crucified Jesus on the cross by ironically fulfilling prophecy and so forth. We see that Cyrus, king of Persia, then allowed the children of Judah to return home after a 70-year in captivity. Exactly the amount of time God said they would be in captivity. Then Ahasuerus, king of Persia, was the king that Esther eventually married in order to save the children of Judah from the evil schemes of Haman, one of the king's highest ranking, was one of the king's highest ranking advisors. He ends up dying at the end of the book. Very gruesome death, by the way. I'm not going to get into it because it's squeamish. But when it comes to the things that go on, seeing these different kingdoms, this is a way to prove that these prophecies about Christ, about the New Testament church, are true, because we see all these events come to pass in the exact way that God prophesied, told others what would happen. We see that in the days of Abraham, God said that the children of Israel would be put under bondage. We see that Moses in Deuteronomy 18, there'd be a prophet like unto myself that will go out before you. Jesus Christ was that prophet. And we see that the Pharisees seemed to be confused with that topic. They kept putting the prophet and Christ as two separate people, which wasn't really true in that aspect. When you look at Greece, the bronze statue, the exact time after Persia ended, we see that Greece came into power. Then we see Rome come into power afterwards, which ends up changing the ancient world in that time. Because Rome did a lot for the New Testament church, whether you see it or not, in the sense that thanks to the Romans taking over most of the known world at the time, roads were built. Roads were built for the traveler's convenience. So these roads were built that lasted for 2,000 years, longer than our West Virginia roads, to be honest. After 2 years, after they put millions of dollars into it, there's something wrong. But we see that these Roman roads, they were made so well that you can still walk on them today. You can still walk on them. They're damaged, of course, 2,000 years of wear and tear. What's going to happen? But we see that these roads were very good roads. They helped people travel a lot faster. It's kind of like what happened when the interstate was started in the United States and started in the 60s and 70s. The interstate was built. And as a result, it was easier to get to places. Then the monorail is a new thing that's coming up in our world today. In order to travel faster than the speed of sound. Apparently, and the monorail is actually going through up in Tucker County in Parsons. They're making a place there. Last time I checked, apparently you can make it to Los Angeles in less than an hour if you go on that thing. It just shows you. But enough of that. I'm going on a tangent when it comes to that. But when it comes to Rome, sure, Rome during the reign of Nero. Of course, Nero was the tyrannical king who played the fiddle while Rome burned and so forth. He was a very messed up guy. But when it came to Rome, Rome helped a lot with the New Testament church because of the roads that they built, because of the good navy that they had. They had good navy ships. They had good roads. They gave a lot in order to preach the gospel to others a lot easier. We see that it was easier to travel on the roads. It was easier to sail a boat to where they needed to go and so forth. And we see that Rome ends up breaking down. And it was conquered by the surrounding nations and so forth. But then we get to the final prophecy, that is the final place that is mentioned. That is the rock. A rock that will never be destroyed, which is the church. And this is the place where Jesus promised Peter that he will establish it, like I said before. Upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Then, according to Isaiah 2, verses 2 through 4, it is a kingdom, it is a church where all nations are welcome, where all nations shall flow into it. Many shall come up and say, "Come and let us go up into the house of the Lord," and so forth. Then we find out that in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44, it is a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It is a king. And the New Testament church has survived for over 2 millennia, and that's no coincidence. It survived this long because of the one who established it, and that is Jesus Christ. And when it comes to that, all of us are required to obey the things that are in said church. If we don't obey the commandments in the New Testament church, there is only one outcome, and that is very grim: that you will be condemned for all eternity in the fires of hell, because you didn't obey the things that are in this book. And that's the reason why we have to be careful. Like I said, the earth is going to be destroyed and so forth, and we have to be sober and vigilant as Christians. Peter tells us that in 1 Peter 5:8. Be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary, the devil walks about the earth like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. We have to be careful with this. We have to be sober. We have to be vigilant. And the things in this world can make us into a stupor, sort of sense, in a sort of way. I know that my grandfather got out of gambling towards the last years of his life. He was addicted to gambling. He went down to Vegas. He ended up going to Wheeling Island and so forth. And he gambled until he had no more money at some points. And I remember him telling me that when it comes to that, your mind is in a stupor, so to speak, because you're not focusing on what's important. You're focusing on if you can get everything lined up properly on the slot machine and so forth. And that's something that I've learned that I never want to do. I never want to be in that state. And as Christians, it's definitely the best thing if we don't get our minds in such a state, that we have tunnel vision when it comes to our focus on life. Okay, that works.
First bell.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, you still got 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a lot more to cover, but this is a perfect stopping point. So I guess I'll end it here. Thank you.
Now, do your teachers at the school of preaching quit 5 minutes early and
Oh,
let you
sometimes-
take, and let you take a break?
Well, sometimes we end an hour early. Depends on how far we get into it.
I certainly never let my students go early.
Well, it depends on how ahead we were. And then there's also some who have to drive 3.5 hours to get up to the school too.